Welcome to Bishop Stortford, a modestly sized market town with a captivating collection of historic landmarks, all packed into a delightful and varied town centre. On this walk around Bishop Stortford, we'll see everything from an array of historic town centre pubs, to the town's delightful marketplace, imposing corn exchange, and even the visible remains of a Norman-era castle dating back almost 900 years. However, we begin in the peaceful churchyard of St Michael's Church, one of the oldest buildings still in use in Bishop Stortford today. Dating mostly from the 15th century as we see it today, St Michael's stands on a site that's been used for religious worship for much longer. It's thought that a church has existed here since as long ago as the 7th century AD, during the Anglo-Saxon period, when Bishop Stortford as we know it today was first born. Positioned on top of a hill overlooking the surrounding area, St Michael's was a particularly prominent local landmark, and its tower, the top of which coloured with red bricks was actually rebuilt and heightened in the 19th century, is still visible for miles around. But to get a better idea of the area that surrounds Bishop Stortford, let's take a quick look at a map to see exactly where this town is. As you can see, Bishop Stortford, or just Stortford as it's commonly known, lies about 30 miles northeast of central London, just inside Hertfordshire, on its border with Essex. Nowadays Bishop Stortford is best known for its proximity to the busy London Stansted Airport, just a couple of miles to the east of where we are now. But the town's location has for a long time been a key element in its history, which actually dates all the way back to the era of the Romans. We'll talk more about Roman Stortford later on in our walk, but having wandered out of the churchyard, we now find ourselves in the upper part of town, an area known as Windhill. Now Windhill is thought to be the oldest part of the modern town of Bishop Stortford, its name likely deriving from the winding street that drops down the hill towards the River Stort, near to where we'll be finishing our walk today. Nowadays, Windhill is a quaint and quiet area of town home to a bunch of nice houses and the local council offices which we're standing in front of here, which are housed within a building known as the Old Monastery, so called in reference to a monastery that existed here from the early 1900s until 1994. Despite having closed down just under 30 years ago, the Old Monastery was actually relatively new compared with the many thousands of medieval monasteries that existed across England, and it was established at the turn of the 20th century by one Brother Xavier Carr, an Irishman from Donegal who moved to Bishop Stortford in 1900, tasked with finding a place to establish a small monastery and a local Catholic church, that being St Joseph's Church in front of us here. St Joseph's, though much newer than the nearby Protestant St Michael's Church, today stands as one of a number of enchanting religious buildings to be found in Bishop Stortford, a town with an evident religious connection in the form of its name, Bishop Stortford. Now the Stortford simply refers to a ford that was used to cross the local River Stort, but the bishop refers to the Bishop of London, who actually bought the manor of Stortford here just under 1,000 years ago in the year 1060, hence leading the place to be known as Bishop Stortford. Windhill, as the oldest part of the town, is closely tied with Bishop Stortford's historical origins, and just across the road from St Michael's Church we can see one of the town's most beautiful and almost certainly oldest buildings, a sprawling timber-framed pub known as the Boar's Head. The Boar's Head, which nowadays serves as a restaurant rather than a pub, has stood here on the upper end of the High Street for centuries, possibly dating back as far as the year 1420, when it was likely used as the church house for St Michael's across the road, and the place where church ales were brewed, an important source of income for the church. Through all those years, the Boar's Head has had a lively history, with stories of secret tunnels beneath the old pub linking it underground to Waytemore Castle on the other side of town, while in the 17th century the inn was regularly visited by the famed diarist Samuel Pepys, who often passed through Bishop Stortford. Having passed by the Boar's Head, we'll now make our way down the hill into the very heart of Bishop Stortford, a compact but fairly lively town centre that's home to a plethora of shops, restaurants and historic buildings. Many of the historic buildings that survive in town today spend much of their life as inns and taverns, such as the George Hotel across the road from us just here. The George, which stands impressively overlooking the central crossroads between the High Street and North Street, is recognised as the oldest recorded inn in Bishop Stortford, first mentioned as long ago as the year 1417, and thought to have been established a couple of decades even earlier than that. The George served as a pub from then for over 600 years, all the way up until 2010, when it sadly closed down, a fate that was unfortunately not unique in Bishop Stortford. Just opposite the George stands one of Stortford's most beautiful buildings, the historic Corn Exchange, which was built back in 1828. Unique in town for its grandiose neoclassical design, the Corn Exchange was built on the site of another old pub, the King's Head, which was demolished to make way for this trading venue, where locals could buy and sell corn, wheat and other grains. Now this was a trade that had been taking place in town for a long time anyway, although the High Street, which was actually once known as Windhill, was the usual venue for this. But the building of the Corn Exchange was symbolic of the changing fortunes of the trade and the town, for better and for worse. While the trade of grain was booming, Stortford was losing ground as a popular stopping point for stagecoaches travelling between London and East Anglia, as the small town centre here was regularly congested, and it led many coaches to eventually pass by Stortford altogether. This was a death knell for historic coaching inns like the King's Head, and the many more taverns which once existed in town but no longer do. However, while the profitability of inns gradually declined, Bishop Stortford could still count on its market and range of other local industries to keep money coming in. And here we find ourselves on the town's delightful Market Square, a small open space at the very centre of Stortford, on which people have been buying and selling goods for nearly 800 years, since at least 1228. Weekly markets have been held ever since then on Thursdays, and while the market as you'll see it today typically sells fresh foods, craft items and more, Bishop Stortford's market was historically best known for the sale of leather. From the 15th to the 19th centuries, Stortford here was the home of a thriving leather-making industry, home to a range of busy tanneries just a few steps away from the marketplace, producing leather which was then sold on stalls lining the road just next to us here, which we now know as Potter Street. Stretching southwards out of the town centre, the undulating Potter Street and the adjoining South Street nowadays effectively serve as Stortford's High Street, where you'll find most of the town's shops, a nice blend of familiar high street brands and independent, locally run establishments. Local entrepreneurialism is nothing new in town, the leather industry having existed as just one of a number in Stortford, the town also having been home to a busy malting and brewing sphere, agriculture and much more, possibly even a small pottery industry too, which may have lent its name to this street here. Nothing concrete to support that origin has ever been found, and Potter Street has long been better known as the home of the historic leather market, 3 separate pubs and rows upon rows of shops, although much of the street was redeveloped in the 1970s, with next to no historic buildings having survived. As such, Potter Street is far from the most attractive in town, although one ace up its sleeve comes in the form of the strikingly modern facade of the local Jackson Square shopping centre here, which was built in 1974 and has had a surprising number of different faces over its nearly 50 years of history. The sleek facade that we see today dates from a refurbishment of 2017, creating the 4th different Potter Street frontage for the shopping centre in its fairly short lifetime, reflecting an ever-changing Bishop Stortford. Still, the shopping centre is a hub of life in the modern town, much like the Market Square just across the road once was too. And in all truth, the sleek 21st century look of the current Jackson Square is far more pleasant than what was once renowned as one of England's less than tranquil marketplaces. Here, we're looking down a small alleyway known as Devoils Lane, but which was historically known by the less pleasant name, Dunghill Lane. That was because this was the place where dung carts from the marketplace were left, creating a foul stench that wafted across what was already a fairly chaotic town centre. Between the 17th and 19th centuries, with the roads of the town centre already clogged up with stagecoaches and more, the tanneries, malt houses and breweries working at full pelt, and the marketplace thronging with people from all over the region, it's fair to say that Stortford, far from a large town, was filled to the brim, with odours galore spilling out into the streets. In fact, the smells and chaos of Bishop Stortford attracted disdain from none other than King Charles II, who would often pass through the town on his way from London to watch the horse racing at Newmarket in Suffolk. He was one of a number who eventually had enough of battling through the town, and instead he went around Bishop Stortford via the Hockerhill bypass, a route that played no small part in hurting the profitability of the many historic inns that once lined the streets of Stortford. As many as 30 different pubs have existed in Bishop Stortford over time, many of which are now gone without a trace, while a select few, the Old George Hotel and the Boar's Head being just a couple of examples, having been preserved at least on the outside, providing us with a window into a time when you could have found a place to drink on pretty much every corner in this town. But as we spin around from looking down North Street, we can venture a little further down the hill through the town centre on Bridge Street here, which, as the name suggests, leads towards the bridge that spans the River Stort. The ford of the Stort here was an important part of the early settlement of this area, as a narrow causeway that provided one of the only crossing points of the river for miles around, the rest of the surrounding area dominated by impassable marshes and floodplains. That's why so many people travelling from the south towards East Anglia have made their way through Bishop Stortford, everybody from the Romans to the people of the 20th century, who would have found yet another pub to stop off at just here. This fine timber-framed inn is the Black Lion, built in the 16th century, and, as well as having played host to many passing visitors over the years, has served a number of interesting purposes over time. It's said that the Bishop of London once used the building as a prison for heretic locals, situated across the street from the Bishop's courthouse, where they would be tried. There's a local legend that a bridge connected the two buildings over the road, which may actually be responsible for the name Bridge Street, although there's no evidence to support that. But as a pub, the Black Lion has served as one of Stortford's longest-running institutions. Just across the road, meanwhile, is yet another pub, and one whose appearance is deceivingly modern. This is the Star Inn, and despite the brick-built exterior, the pub dates back to at least 1636, with a timber-framed structure, much like the Black Lion and the Boar's Head, hidden behind the facade that we see today. So, despite the closure of many of the town's historic pubs, there's still no shortage of places to stop for a pint in Bishop Stortford. But the Star Inn is the last that we'll be passing by on this walk today, as we're now going to make our way towards the River Stort and the site of the impressive remains of a Norman-era castle. The castle, known as Waytemore Castle, was built just under 900 years ago, but as we've mentioned a couple of times, that was far from the earliest origins of this town. Around the year 50 AD, it was the Romans who were first to make their presence known in the area where Bishop Stortford exists now, as they built a road through this area, making use of the nearby ford of the River Stort. As we pass by Cooper's of Stortford, a store located in a large 19th century malt house, the Roman road that was built through here was a part of the much longer Stane Street, which connected St Albans, or Verulamium as it was known then, to Colchester, the first major city in Roman Britain. Linking two important settlements across the island, therefore, Stane Street was well trodden, and much like what happened centuries later, Bishop Stortford proved a convenient place to stay for passing travellers, giving birth to a small Roman settlement by the road, although this was abandoned in the early 5th century when the Romans left Britain altogether. But as we mentioned at the start of our walk, it's this location which has proved time and time again to be a vital part of Bishop Stortford's armour. And as we reach the bottom of Bridge Street, you'll see a number of much larger, much more modern buildings that symbolise how Stortford has continued to grow in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, again helped by its location. Despite not being the largest town at first glance, over 40,000 people now call Bishop Stortford home, and the town has grown considerably in size over the past 40 years. While there's a modest amount to see and do if you come and visit Bishop Stortford, the town is best known as a commuter town, many people living here and then commuting by road or rail to work in the likes of London or Cambridge. Stansted Airport, which we mentioned briefly at the start of our walk meanwhile, has also risen to become the UK's 4th busiest airport, providing employment for a number of people in the surrounding area, and towns like Bishop Stortford here. So, in short, Bishop Stortford is a town whose fortunes have been steadily improving over time. And while it was once known as a chaotic and foul-smelling place filled with traffic, the town was actually named as the best place to live in the UK very recently, in 2020. How things change, but one thing that hasn't changed much over the last 900 years is this, the remains of Waytemore Castle. Normally the park in which the castle mound is located is open to visit, and you can even walk up on top to get a closer look at the old fortress. But as it's being refurbished at the minute, we'll take in the view from just across this stream. Now, Waytemore Castle actually has a history going back to the Anglo-Saxon era around 1400 years ago. But it was the Normans who converted that small earthen castle into a modern wooden fortress around the year 1086. In the early 12th century, this was then converted into a much stronger stone castle, with a great keep situated atop the earthen mound we can see here, as part of the typical motte and bailey layout common among castles at the time, and it served as a tightly guarded fortress that was difficult to capture. The River Stort, which flows just past the castle on the other side of the mound, was a vital natural defence, and so the castle became used as a formidable prison, and a residence for the lord of the manor, that being the Bishop of London if he was in town. Though far from England's most famous castle, the remains of Waytemore Castle point to a time in the medieval era when Bishop Stortford, the town, was growing up on the outskirts of this fortress, one last example of how this seemingly marvellous location played into so much development of this town. Sadly, however, it's here that we've reached the end of our walk around Bishop Stortford for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're looking forward to visiting Bishop Stortford for yourself sometime too.